Every organization is affected in some way by the global environment. In this lesson, we're going to learn what managers need to know about such things as managing globally, including regional trading alliances, how organizations go international, and cross cultural differences. I think we need to begin our discussion with the global environment by defining just a few terms that I think are important. Globalization refers to a process by which organizations develop influence or operations across those international borders. Now, nationalism refers to patriotic ideals and policies that glorify one's own country's values. And parochialism is viewing the world solely through our own perspectives, leading to an inability to recognize differences between people. Parochialism is an obstacle for many U.S. managers, and it stems from another term, monolingualism. Now, managers might have one of three perspectives or attitudes towards international business. An ethnocentric attitude is the parochialistic belief that the best work approaches and practices are those of the home country. That's that country in which the company's headquarters are located. Now, a polycentric attitude is the view that the managers in the host country know the best work approaches and practices for running their business. Now, a geocentric attitude is a world oriented view that focuses on using the best approaches and the best people from around the globe. To be successfully as a global manager, an individual needs to be sensitive to differences in national customs and practices. Global trade among nations doesn't just happen on its own. As trade issues arise, global trade systems ensure that the trade continues efficiently and effectively. Indeed, one of the realities of globalization is that the interdependence of countries, that is, what happens in one can impact others, whether it be good or a bad. Let's take a look at some important global trade mechanisms like the World Trade Organization, the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank Group, and the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development are just a few. And you can do your own research to learn more about all of these that I have listed. I'll start with the World Trade Organization, or the WTO. This was formed in 1995 and it evolved from GATT, or the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade. The WTO, or the World Trade Organization, is the only global organization dealing with the rules of trade among nations. Membership consists of around 164 countries. The goal of the WTO is to help countries conduct trade through a system of rules. Although critics have staged vocal protests against the WTO, claiming that the global trade destroys jobs and the natural environment, it appears to play a very important role in monitoring, promoting, and of course protecting global trade. Another one I want to talk about is the International Monetary Fund. This is an organization of 189 countries that promotes international monetary cooperation, and it provides member countries with policy advice, temporary loans, and technical assistance to establish and to maintain financial stability, and which should lead to strengthening of economies. Now, the World Bank is just an international financial institution that provides vital financial and technical assistance to developing countries around the world. Now, I've already mentioned GATT before, and General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade is just an agreement between countries to reduce or eliminate tariffs. Now, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, well, this was formed back in 1961, and it's a 37-member group of nations from developed countries, and they work to stimulate economic growth and world trade through coordinating domestic and international economic policies. The last one I want to talk about, and this should be known to everyone, and that's the European Union, or the EU as they're more commonly called. But the EU is a union of about 28 European nations created as a unified economic and trade entity. The The primary motivation for the creation of the EU in February of 1992 was to allow its member nations to reassert their position against the industrial strength of the US and Japan. Let's take a look at a little bit more here in the EU, but one of the major trading blocs is the EU, the European Union. And the North American Free Trade Agreement, or NAFTA, is another one of those major trading blocs. But the EU here is a union, as I said, of 28 European nations. And what they did is, what's significant about them, and I mentioned that they act as a unified economic and trade entity. Well, they use the euro as a single common currency amongst those 28 European nations. The primary motivation for creation of the EU was to allow its member nations, those 28 nations, to help against the industrial strength of the US and Japan. So by having that common currency definitely helps their trade entity and economic allowance between the nations act much more easily. Now, I mentioned NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, and I've mentioned this multiple times because I think it's very important for you to know and understand. And this was an agreement back in 1994 that was created among the Mexican, Canadian, and U.S. governments to be able to work towards eliminating any type of trade barriers. Other Latin American nations have also become part of the free trade agreements, like Colombia, Mexico, Venezuela. They have led the way when all three signed an economic part in the 1994, eliminating those things like the import duties and the tariffs. Another one that you could also understand here is the U.S. Central American Free Trade Agreement, or CAFTA. This promotes trade liberalization between the U.S. and 5 Central American countries: Costa Rica, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, and Nicaragua, as well as the Dominican Republic. And sometimes you might see the U.S. Central American Free Trade Agreement as CAFTA-DR for the addition of the Dominican Republic. Most economists are proponents of free trade, since it is believed that the free trade benefits all those countries involved. There are a few sections that kind of highlight arguments for and against free globalization and managerial implications. Let's talk about the win-win argument. In this situation, the every country wins argument is largely based on the law of comparative advantage that maintains that countries should focus production on the goods or services that that country can produce at the lowest opportunity cost, and then engage in trade to obtain other nations' outputs. This was the dominant view from the mid-1940s to about 2015. Another view we have is the downside of globalization. Here, the middle class in both North America and Europe are suffering from wage stagnation, and they began to question the effects of globalization. This group, or proponents of this, charged global firms with shipping production to cheaper labor countries in Asia and keeping wages suppressed in the developed nations. Considerable evidence supports the position that some sectors and groups and countries are harmed by the free markets and the open borders. The America First and Brexit movements were spawned by the harmful effects of globalization. And another case here that we have is globalization today, looking at it today. Opposition to globalization and the movement towards nationalism and protectionism is louder today than it has been in around 80 years. However, globalization will not simply disappear due to these factors. Global firms employ tens of millions of workers worldwide, and they have billions of dollars invested in infrastructure and the supply chains that support this overall globalization. There is little political will to undo this level of investment. The evidence is overwhelming that free trade is not the cause of unemployment. Research shows us that workers have been displaced due to technology as the number one factor. Automation was the cause of over 80% of the manufacturing job loss in the US between the years 2000 and 2010. Most people still believe the benefits of globalization far outweigh the costs. As consumers, well, we like lower prices, and investors, you guessed it, they really like higher profits. And high skilled workers in developed nations end up with higher wages, as do workers in developing nations, all due to this globalization. What does all this mean for managers? Since globalization is here to stay, well, managers and those that want to be managers must develop the skills that are needed for global management. Managers need to be flexible and willing to work with people from other countries. Gaining of international experience is very beneficial, as well as the speaking of another language, such as Spanish or Mandarin. Having this type of skill would definitely open doors for your entire career. Managers that have entrepreneurial interests need to gain an understanding of those global markets and the various ways in how they, as entrepreneurs, can enter those markets. Businesses have been conducted internationally for many, many years. As an example, DuPont conducted business in China way back in '63, and Heinz has been manufacturing their brands in the UK since 1905. Another example, Ford established its first overseas sales branch in France back in 1908. Multinational corporations did not become popular until the mid-1960s. Global organizations can be classified in these following categories. Of course, we have the multinational corporation, or MNC, and this is just a broad term that refers to any and all types of international companies that maintain operation in, you guessed it, multiple countries. Well, one type of these MNCs, or multinational corporations, is a multi-domestic corporation, and this decentralizes management and other decisions to the local country. For example, Nestle uses a unique marketing and sales approach for each of the markets in which it operates around the world. Furthermore, it adapts its products to local tastes by offering different products in those different markets. Another type of multinational corporation is a global company. And in this situation, it centralizes its management and other decisions in the home country, such as with companies with Microsoft and Apple. A transnational corporation, or TNC, sometimes is going to be referred to as a borderless organization. So you might hear that term get thrown out there too. But this is a type of international company in which the artificial geographical barriers are eliminated. They don't have a central headquarters in one country, which makes all of its decisions obviously globally. Organizations often use different approaches when they go international. There are several stages of this that I have illustrated here, where an organization typically progresses through when it wants to go international. Now, companies that go international may begin simply by using global outsourcing, or you might hear this known as global sourcing. The terms are interchangeable. In this stage of going international, companies purchase materials or labors from around the world wherever the materials or labor are going to be the most or the least expensive. Beyond the stage of global sourcing, each successive step or stage is going to become more international. Then it involves much more investment, and of course, it's going to involve more risk. Now, in this next stage, companies may go international by exporting or importing. Both exporting and importing requires minimal investment and risk. Remember, if you're going to go exporting, here's where you're making products domestically and you're selling those abroad. Importing is just the opposite of that. It's acquiring products that are made abroad and selling those products domestically. In the early stages of going international, managers may also use licensing. This is where we're given another organization the right to make or sell its products using its technologies or product specifications. Another thing that managers can do other than licensing is it may use franchising. Here you're going to give another organization the right to use your name and operating methods. Now, after an organization has done international business for a period of time, managers may decide to make more of a direct investment in international markets by forming what's known as a strategic alliance. This is just a partnership between an organization and a foreign company, which would be its partner. In a strategic alliance, partners share resources and their knowledge in developing new products or even building production facilities. Now, a joint venture, this is a very specific type of strategic alliance, and this may be undertaken to allow partners to form a separate, independent organization for some business purpose. Joint ventures are only owned by two different persons or parties. It is used like a business agreement in which both partners agree to share a profit in the specific ratio of their ownership. The partners in the business may also be known as co-ventures. Now, a joint venture is generally formed to achieve some type of specific project or goal. There was a joint venture that you may not have known what it was, but you've probably been part of this. And that was a 2008 joint venture with NBC Universal Television Group, Comcast, and Disney ABC Television Group by the Walt Disney Company. And the object of this joint venture was to create some type of video streaming application or website that you might have heard of called Hulu. And of course, this product was created and it provides streaming quality content which is on computers, laptops, or mobile devices. So it's a streaming service that goes across multiple platforms. I bet you've heard of that one. Now, managers may decide to make a direct investment in a foreign country by establishing a foreign subsidiary. This happens in which a company sets up a separate and independent production facility or office. Establishing a foreign subsidiary involves the greatest commitment of resources and the greatest risk of all of the stages that I've listed here in going international. Managing in a global environment entails many challenges. Now, assume for a moment that you're a manager going to work for a branch of a global organization in some foreign country. You know that your environment will differ from the one at home, but how? What should you even look for? Well, let's talk about managing in that global environment a little bit here. The legal political environment does not have to be unstable or revolutionary to be a challenge to managers. The fact that a country's political system differs from that of the U.S. is very important to recognize. Well, the economic environment also presents many challenges to foreign-based managers, including things like fluctuation in the currency exchange rates, general inflation, and of course, the diverse tax policies. In a free market economy, resources are primarily owned by the private sector. But in a planned economy, all economic decisions are planned by through a central government. And of course, we have to talk about the cultural environment. Countries have different cultures, just as organizations do. National culture is the value and the attitude that's shared by individuals from a specific country that shape their behavior and their beliefs about what is important to them. Countries that are not very conducive to business investments for one reason or another include things like rampant corruption, or maybe they have high political instability, or they're very restrictive, if not exploitative, or foreign investment and policies. We have woeful security and safety issues. Some of these countries in the business world that have been identified are going to be countries like Afghanistan, Chad, Haiti, Libya, Gambia, Togo, Venezuela, Yemen, Zimbabwe. Most of these countries have a high inflation rate. They may have extreme poverty rate and a lack of trained or skilled labor force. For some, this current situation has been brought by recent conflicts and civil war, while others have made it onto this list due to poor governance and corruption. You must learn how to develop your global perspective. Human resource managers say that there is a great need for cross-cultural understanding and savvy in business settings. Most executives across the world say that the cross-cultural leadership is their top management challenge. During your career, you will most likely work with individuals who were born in a different country and probably don't speak English as their first language. Their habits and their customs will be different, and you may have a hard time in understanding their behavior. While as future managers and leaders, you should increase your ability to work with people from different countries by doing such things as becoming aware of your own level of openness and your confidence in cross-cultural experience. Work on expanding your comfort zone. You should also assume differences until similarity is proven. Now, to avoid embarrassing misinterpretations, assume that individuals from different cultures will interpret communication or behavior differently until some similarities are proven to you. You should also emphasize description rather than interpretation or evaluation. Description emphasizes observation. Some customs may be different from what you're used to, but different doesn't make them wrong or inferior. I can't emphasize this enough. Show empathy. Interpret the words, motives, and actions of a person from another culture from the perspective of that culture rather than your own. Treat your initial interpretations as a working hypothesis. Just pay careful attention to feedback in order to avoid some serious miscommunications and resulting problems. I'll leave you at this last point. Just educate yourself on cross-cultural issues and approaches. Develop some international experience through traveling if you can. Consider studying abroad and get to know the international students, that are at your school or at your work, and learn about their countries and their cultures so that you have an understanding of them and you can help with helping them do business with you. We have so much to learn from one another, and by doing that, we are going to thrive in a global environment. Thanks for following along, and I hope you will take some of this information, go do some more research on your own, and learn about the impacts and influence of managing in a global environment. Thank you.